Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive today. We'll be exploring, the wisdom of Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Oh, a classic.
That's a book that's been a bestseller for almost a century. And we're going to be, using excerpts from the book itself to kind of unpack some of the key
I'm
ideas.
excited.
Yeah. You might be thinking, why bother with a book that old?
Right.
But trust me, Carnegie's insights into human nature, they're as relevant today as they ever were.
Oh, yeah, for sure. What I think is really fascinating about Carnegie's work is that, his advice isn't just like, pulled out of thin air.
Right.
He spent years and years and years researching.
Wow.
He read biographies of just countless influential people, and then he interviewed successful people. And then he took all that and analyzed real life scenarios, to try to figure out what made these people tick.
That's impressive.
So the stuff that we're about to kind of unpack here is really the result of years and years of meticulous research and observation.
Okay, so let's get into it. One of the, I think, biggest takeaways from the book is this whole idea of like appreciation and encouragement.
Yeah.
Carnegie just repeatedly stresses how important it is to make others feel valued. In fact, he even uses the example of Charles Schwab, the steel magnate,
Oh, wow.
who attributed his success to his ability to work with people and his sincere appreciation for them.
It's interesting. And it's not just about like praising high achievers like Schwab. Carnegie also talks about how just like a simple act of encouragement can completely transform somebody's life. Like he tells a story about a woman who just blossomed basically simply because somebody gave her a reputation to live up to.
Wow.
And it just shows how powerful it can be to just make someone feel seen and valued.
It really makes you think about the impact even just small gestures of recognition can have.
Yeah.
Do you remember that example from the steel mill where workers outperformed everyone else simply because their daily output was marked with chalk on the floor?
Oh, yeah. That's a fantastic illustration of how powerful just like sincere praise can be, for motivation and performance. It just speaks to, I think, that very like fundamental human desire that we all have.
Huh?
We want to feel important. And tapping into that desire, I think, can be one of the most effective ways to actually influence others.
So is Carnegie essentially saying that if you want to win friends and influence people, start by making them feel important?
Absolutely.
But how do we actually do that? Does he give any specific advice?
Oh, yeah. He gives a whole toolbox of techniques.
Mhm.
But I think, one of the most fundamental is understanding perspectives.
Okay.
Seeing things from the other person's point of view.
Okay. I could see how that would be important, but can you give me like a concrete example?
Yeah.
How does that play out in real life?
Sure. He tells this great story about a sales representative who finally won over, like this really tough client, by simply taking the time to understand his passion for this organization called the Hotel Greeters. And, the sales rep didn't even talk about his product until he had connected with the client, on a personal level.
That makes sense. So it's about finding common ground and building a connection before you try to push your own agenda.
Yeah, exactly.
It reminds me of that other anecdote where a man gave away his prized Packard car simply because someone showed genuine interest in his stories and made him feel heard.
Yes. And I think all those stories really highlight the power of focusing on the other person's needs and interests first. It's like, putting a deposit in the emotional bank account,
I like that analogy.
building up that reserve of goodwill, that just makes people more receptive to you.
Okay. So we've talked about the power of appreciation and the importance of understanding perspectives. But what about those kind of inevitable situations where you have to deal with criticism or disagreement?
Oh, yeah.
Does Carnegie have any advice on handling those gracefully?
Yeah, he actually strongly advises against direct criticism and arguments. He really suggests that they rarely lead to anything productive. In fact, he tells this like humorous anecdote about an argument that he had about a Shakespeare quote, where he learned this valuable lesson. He said, "Why prove to a man that he is wrong?"
I love that. It's so true. Like trying to win an argument often just ends up damaging the relationship. So what's the alternative?
Well, he suggests a couple of things. First, admit your own mistakes before addressing the other person's errors.
Okay.
That kind of disarms them and creates a more collaborative atmosphere. And then another technique he recommends is this yes technique.
Okay.
Getting someone into an agreeable mindset, by guiding the conversation in a way that encourages agreement, even on potentially contentious issues.
I've heard about that technique, but I'm not sure I fully understand how it works. Could you give me an example?
Sure. He gives this great example of a bank teller using this technique to win over, like, a hesitant new customer.
Mhm.
And by asking a series of questions that the customer would naturally agree with, the teller was able to just subtly shift the customer's perspective and kind of get them to embrace the bank's services, with enthusiasm.
Wow. That's fascinating. So instead of trying to force our point, we can guide people towards agreement by framing things in a way that resonates with them.
Exactly. And it's not about being manipulative, it's about understanding how to communicate effectively and build consensus. Remember, these techniques are tools for building stronger, more positive relationships, not for getting your way at all costs.
Okay, this is all great in theory.
Right.
But how does this translate into, real life? Like, let's say I want to apply these principles at work. Where do I even begin?
Well, one of the simplest yet most effective strategies that Carnegie highlights is just remembering and using people's names.
Okay.
It sounds so basic, but it can have a huge impact.
Right.
I mean, he even talks about how, like, incredibly busy and powerful figures like Napoleon and Roosevelt, they made a point of remembering names
Wow.
because they understood that it made people feel valued and respected.
So it's not just about, like, being polite. It's a strategic way to make people feel important and build stronger connections.
Exactly.
But what about those times when you just can't seem to remember someone's name?
Mm.
Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, Carnegie suggests, like, really focusing intently when you first hear someone's name, repeating it back to them, even associating it with a mental image. He emphasizes that remembering names takes practice and effort, like any skill.
Right.
It's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Okay. So beyond remembering names, what are some other, like, practical things that people can do to make others feel important in everyday interactions?
Well, he emphasizes truly listening to people and showing genuine interest in what they have to say. He actually tells the story about how he managed to get these high-profile authors to speak at his class simply by expressing a sincere interest in their work and asking them, like, thoughtful questions about their process.
So true.
Yeah.
People are often flattered when you take a genuine interest in them. Makes them feel like their thoughts and opinions actually matter.
Yeah, it's about shifting the focus from yourself to the other person. And he gives this great example of this with a story of a struggling sales representative who finally won over a client.
Wait, is this the one where the salesman kept pushing his product but the client wasn't interested?
Yeah, that's the one.
Huh.
And the salesman finally realized his mistake and decided to do some research on his client. And he discovered that his client was super passionate about this organization, the hotel greeters.
Okay.
And he shifted the conversation to that.
And I bet the client was thrilled to talk about his passion, which led to a genuine connection.
You got it. And it perfectly illustrates Carnegie's principle of seeing things from the other person's point of view. By showing a genuine interest in his client's passion, the salesman was able to build that rapport and ultimately win him over.
This is all starting to make a lot of sense. It seems like a lot of these principles are about being more mindful and intentional in our interactions.
Absolutely.
It's about being present in the moment, truly listening and making that conscious effort to understand the other person's perspective.
Yeah.
So Carnegie is essentially saying, if you want to win friends and influence people, start by making them feel seen, heard, and understood. It's not about manipulation. It's about genuine human connection.
Exactly. He's giving us a framework for building stronger, more authentic relationships based on mutual respect and appreciation.
This is all really resonating with me. I'm already starting to think about how I can apply these principles in my own life.
Me too.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to dive into some more of Carnegie's specific advice, on making people feel important. And I'm curious to hear, what other insights he has to offer. So we'll be back in just a bit to continue our deep dive into Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We're continuing our deep dive into how to win friends and influence people, and I'm excited to kind of uncover more of Carnegie's insights. One thing that really struck me in that last segment was just how simple yet profound his advice is. It's not about complicated strategies or manipulation. It's really about genuine human connection.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the key ingredients of that connection, according to Carnegie, is enthusiasm.
Okay.
He even goes as far as to say, arouse enthusiasm among your associates.
I can see how that would be important. Like, enthusiasm is contagious.
Yeah.
Think about the people that you really enjoy being around the most. They're probably ones who are passionate and excited about what they do.
Exactly. And it's not just about being a cheerleader, it's really about finding something that you're genuinely passionate about and letting that passion shine through, in your interactions. Carnegie even, he shares a personal anecdote about his own struggles as a salesman and how he went from, feeling discouraged to becoming like a top performer, all because he found something that he truly believed in.
So he's saying that genuine enthusiasm, it comes from within, like from connecting with something that truly excites you.
Yeah.
But what about those times when you're stuck in a job that you're not passionate about? Does he offer any advice for those situations?
He does. He acknowledges that, not everyone can have their dream job, but he encourages people to find ways to bring enthusiasm and engagement to their work, no matter what it is. He suggests, looking for the positive aspects, challenging yourself to learn new skills, even finding ways to inject like creativity and fun into mundane tasks.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So even if you can't, change your job overnight, you can change your approach, right?
Yeah.
And find ways to make it more engaging.
Totally. It's about taking ownership of your experience and finding those sparks of joy even in those unexpected places.
Okay, let's move on to another I think powerful concept that Carnegie emphasizes, this whole idea of setting a good example.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that story about the teacher who couldn't get his students to follow the rules?
Oh, yeah.
And he finally realized that he wasn't always following the rules himself.
Right.
Like his actions were speaking louder than his words.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he finally decided to lead by example. He started showing up on time, being organized, treating everyone with respect. And guess what? The students, they started to follow his lead.
So it's a powerful reminder that we can't expect others to behave in a certain way if we're not willing to do so ourselves. Like our actions have a ripple effect on those around us.
For sure.
So being mindful of the example that we set is crucial.
Absolutely. And this principle, I think, applies not only in personal interactions, but also in leadership roles.
Okay.
Like, think about that foreman overseeing the construction of a new hospital. And instead of just like barking orders, he took the time to explain, how this hospital was going to serve the community and potentially save lives.
Okay, yeah.
And by connecting their work to a larger purpose, he was able to inspire a sense of pride and ownership in the workers.
So he wasn't just managing tasks, he was leading people.
Exactly. Yeah. He was inspiring them to strive for excellence and to make a real difference in the world.
That's a great example of how a leader can like leverage the power of purpose to motivate and inspire their team.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that I think we all face at some point in our lives.
Oh, yeah.
Criticism.
I
know, right?
Yeah. It's definitely something that can be difficult to handle, especially if it's delivered in like a harsh way or a judgmental way.
Right.
But Carnegie emphasizes that criticism, even when it stings, can actually be valuable if we approach it with the right mindset.
I think that's so important. It's so easy to get defensive, when we're criticized. But if we can take a step back and try to see it as an opportunity for growth,
Yeah.
we can actually learn and improve from the experience.
For sure. And Carnegie suggests that we should try to like separate the criticism from the person who's delivering it, focus on the message rather than the messenger and ask ourselves, is there any truth to it?
Okay. So it's about being open-minded and willing to learn, even when it's uncomfortable. But what about those times when the criticism just feels unfair or inaccurate?
Oh, yeah.
Does he have any advice for handling those situations?
He does. He suggests, calmly and respectfully explaining our perspective without getting into an argument. Or trying to prove the other person wrong. It's about seeking clarification and finding common ground.
That makes sense. It's about having a dialogue, not a duel.
Exactly. And remember, thanking the person for their feedback just shows maturity.
Okay.
And a willingness to take responsibility for our actions.
That's a great point. It's about demonstrating respect, even in those challenging situations.
Yeah.
So we've talked about criticism, but what about praise? What does Carnegie say about the power of making people feel appreciated?
Well, he really emphasizes that one of the deepest human desires is to feel important, feel valued and recognized for our contributions. Remember that story about the woman who gifted her prized Packard car to a man who simply listened to her stories and made her feel heard?
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that sometimes the simplest gestures of kindness and appreciation can have a profound impact on others.
Right. It's about recognizing the value in others and making them feel seen. And when it comes to giving praise, Carnegie really stresses the importance of sincerity.
Oh,
You know, it's not about flattery. It's about identifying genuine qualities to admire and expressing our appreciation in specific and meaningful ways.
right. So it's about being authentic and specific in our praise so it truly resonates with the other person.
And he provides a great example of this in action with this story of a manager who was trying to motivate a struggling employee.
Yeah.
And instead of criticizing him, you know, the manager chose to focus on his positive qualities and express confidence in his ability.
And that encouragement made all the difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just highlights the power of focusing on strengths and potential rather than dwelling on weaknesses.
It seems like so much of Carnegie's advice, it boils down to shifting our perspective.
Yeah.
From focusing on ourselves to focusing on others.
You're absolutely right. It's about being less self-centered and more other-centered. You know, it's about understanding that the key to winning friends and influencing people is to genuinely care about them and to treat them with respect and kindness and appreciation.
This is all making a lot of sense, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface of Carnegie's wisdom.
Yeah.
I'm eager to dive into more of his practical strategies and insights.
Let's do it.
Okay. We'll be back in just a bit to continue exploring how to win friends and influence people.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back. We're jumping right back into how to win friends and influence people.
You know, as we've been talking about all these principles, I've been thinking about how much they really do revolve around just understanding and respecting the other person's perspective.
Yeah, it's almost like a golden rule for human interaction, right?
Right.
Carnegie reminds us that we're not dealing with creatures of logic, but creatures of emotion. So to truly connect with somebody, we have to speak to their heart, not just their head. That makes me think of that story where Carnegie compared a notorious criminal like John Dillinger to a business tycoon like John D. Rockefeller.
Oh, right.
And he said they both, in their own way, craved recognition.
Right. They wanted to feel important. Yeah. And that just shows you how that need, it transcends social status and background, right? It's a fundamental human desire.
Okay.
And Carnegie actually gives us some very specific actions that we can take to tap into that.
Okay. Like remembering and using names. Something as simple as that can just make someone feel so seen and valued.
Totally.
Do you remember that anecdote about the man who was so touched when somebody finally pronounced his name correctly?
Oh, yeah.
After like 15 years in a new country?
Yeah. Yeah, it just shows you how those small gestures can have such a huge impact. Like, think about that hotel manager who greeted every single employee by name.
Oh, wow.
Even the scullery maids. And it just, created this culture of loyalty and respect.
It's amazing how those seemingly insignificant actions, they can just ripple outwards.
Yeah, and it all ties back to that deep-seated human need to feel like we matter.
Right.
And Carnegie even suggests that harnessing this need can be a powerful tool for motivating people. Do you remember the story about Charles Schwab and the chalk mark on the floor?
Oh, yeah, the steel mill example.
Yes, that's the one. Just a simple 6. It became this symbol of achievement.
Right.
And it wasn't really about the chalk itself,
Right.
but the feeling of pride and recognition that it represented.
Right. So it's a brilliant example of how a leader can tap into like intrinsic motivation. That desire to excel,
Right.
to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
It's not about forcing people to do things.
Right.
It's about creating an environment where they want to do their best.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, let's talk about another, I think, powerful principle that Carnegie emphasizes, arousing in the other person an eager want.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember this one?
I do.
It's about figuring out what the other person wants.
Yeah.
Right? And then framing your request in a way that aligns with their desires.
Right. He uses this analogy of fishing. He's like, if you want to catch fish, you have to use bait that the fish want to eat. Do you remember the story about the guy who wanted to rent a ballroom for his lectures? And instead of, begging the manager, he highlighted how much money the manager was losing by not being able to rent the ballroom to other events.
Right.
And by focusing on the manager's self-interest, he basically made him want to say yes.
Right. And that that strategy can be applied in so many different situations. Like, whether you're trying to convince your boss to give you a raise or your kids to clean their rooms, it's about finding that sweet spot where their interests align with yours.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's about understanding what motivates people
Mhm.
and tailoring your approach accordingly.
Yeah.
But does Carnegie ever talk about, appealing to people's better nature?
Oh, he does, for sure. He emphasizes that people generally want to do the right thing. So aligning your request with, their sense of fairness or generosity or even adventure can be incredibly effective. Remember that example of the father who convinced his son to pick up like fallen pears
Yeah.
by praising his appreciation for beautiful
It
things.
made him feel like proud, right?
Yeah.
Not burdened, even though he was doing a chore.
Totally. And it's incredible how just a simple shift in perspective can completely change the dynamic of a situation.
Right.
Right? It's about framing the task in a way that appeals to their better nature.
Okay. So what's the ultimate takeaway from all of this? Like, what's the one thing that you hope people walk away with after listening to this deep dive?
I think it's this. Success in dealing with people hinges on understanding and respecting their perspective. It's about approaching every interaction with genuine interest and a desire to make the other person feel valued.
Right. So it's not about manipulating or tricking people into doing what you want.
Right.
It's about building genuine connections, fostering mutual respect, and finding ways to work together towards a common goal.
Yeah, and it's about realizing that everyone, regardless of their background or their status, they want to feel important and appreciated and understood. And when we tap into those desires, I think we unlock a world of possibilities for positive influence and lasting relationships.
So to borrow a phrase from Carnegie, if you want to win friends and influence people, start by making them feel like they matter.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, the best way to do that is to be genuine, to listen attentively, and to show sincere appreciation for the unique individuals that are all around you.
And on that note, that wraps up our deep dive into Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Until next time, keep diving deep.